Okay, the computer and all that jazz tells me that we are live. So welcome to our Break the Cage Now episode of language number 5. Today we're going to talk about habits. I named this episode Habits, Oh, Those Habits, because so much of what we do is controlled by habit, and that can be both good and bad. If you let your habits be the masters, then it's usually bad. And if they are the servants, then it's really good. So they're really good servants and really lousy masters. So we're going to talk about those with respect to language. Now, those of you that haven't perhaps followed, this is the 5th in our series of 6 Hangouts about language. The first ones are all on my YouTube channel, if you'd like to watch them. And I would encourage you to do that, about loose lips and about creating with language and all of the different topics we covered. There's 2 more today, and then next week will be the 6th one and the final one in this series on language. And today we're going to cover different parts about habits and how they play into language. And so I scrolled my text out of the way so I can't see it. It says, okay, habits. We're going to talk about why we fail and speaking to please others, and then something I called laziness and the easy road. So, and all of that in respect to how that applies to language. Welcome my guest, Ephraim Olschewski, who is joining me from?
I'm home. I'm Las Vegas, Nevada.
Home in Las Vegas today. So cool. And I'm excited to have him. So Ephraim, before I get started, do you want to say anything to start with about your thoughts on habits and language?
When you said that about habits, I thought about, have you seen this video going around, the backwards bicycle? Have you seen that?
You know, I did not. I saw the title and no, I haven't watched it.
You'll love it. And for anyone watching that hasn't seen it yet, basically the bike is, it's set up so that when you turn the handlebar one way, the tire turns the other way. So it's just backwards. And the guy's an engineer, and he says, if you can ride a bike, and he says, and I don't make definitive statements very often, but you cannot ride this bike. And he says, I know that because I travel all around the world, and he goes to universities and different places, and he'll tell them, you know, like, if you can ride this bike 10 feet, I'll give you $200. And people can't do it because the way that their brain is wired is to ride a regular bike. So he learned how to ride this bike, and it took him 8 months of practicing daily to learn how to ride this bike. And so those are some habits. Like that's the power, you know, like the way our brain, like like the neuroscience of it and the pathways that get formed in our brain, and the way that habits work. So I would say, yeah, let's choose our habits carefully.
Oh, okay, great. Well, that's fantastic. I was just looking at some notes that are of people that are watching today. So anyway, that's absolutely true. And it's a fabulous example. And I can imagine, you know, we're trained to lean right if we want to go right and all that kind of stuff. And I imagine the spectacle that trying to ride such a contraption would be. It would be really funny, I'm sure, to watch. And I'm sure to his great amusement, he's seen people crash repeatedly. And so we do the same thing with language. We do the same thing with language, and regardless of the care that we commit to in our mind, unless we do some of the work that this fellow did to learn to ride the bicycle differently, we actually will be end up being controlled by our habits. And so the entire process of creating intentional habits is really important in all areas of our lives, but today we're talking about language. So the first thing I want to talk about is why we fail. And I don't mean why we fail in life and why we fail. Those are all related, but it's a little bit big to cover in a 30-minute hangout. But I'm just going to talk about language. So we've gone on now 4 weeks. This is our 5th week talking about language, declarative language, descriptive language, creation language, creating things first in language, speaking without thinking, making kinds of commitments we don't intend to, you know, we don't really intend to keep, but just say stuff. We've talked about that at length. So why is it after such discussion, and you would intuitively and intellectually understand the truth of the things that we've talked about, why is it that we fail when we go to change the way we language. And the reason I want to talk about today is the habits that we have. So if I have a habit of making promises I can't keep, or I have a habit of just promising myself I'll do things and then not doing them, that becomes sort of the guiding principle of my life, and I live into that habit. So Ephraim, if I have and I know you know people like this because it's what we do in coaching, but someone that is in the habit of saying things that they're going to do that day or that week and then not doing it, how hard is that? What has to happen in order for that pattern or habit to change?
Well, you know, in therapy, there's a term that they use, and it's called BLAST, and it's whenever it stands for bored, lonely, angry, stressed, or tired. And so let's say the way someone becomes an alcoholic or a drug addict, or and we could say we're just like people are addicted to the way that they use language, or you know, if you have a habit of making commitments that you don't keep, then you could say that's an addiction. But whenever someone's bored, lonely, angry, stressed, or tired, and they use and they, let's say they have a drink of alcohol, and you do that repeatedly, let's say every time I'm bored, I have a drink of alcohol. And if I do that repeatedly over a period of time, it creates neural pathways in the brain that say, when I'm bored, I drink. And that's how addictions get formed. And so it seemed like just if that's how you form an addiction, wouldn't it seem like the opposite would be the way that you would, if I have a pattern of making commitments and not keeping them, it seems like wouldn't the way that you interrupt that would be to make commitments and keep them, and you know, like making it really simple. But most of the time, I would say the way I would answer that is that people are probably unaware of they don't really get the impact of it. Like they're not really present to the cost of what it's really costing them.
So that's a really good answer on two things. I want to talk a little bit about that. It's certainly the first thing to do is to start making commitments and keeping them. But I think you're absolutely right. We're not aware of either the cost or the number of times that we do it. I mean, if you're not present to that and you actually write down or some other way notate the number of commitments that come out of your mouth, even casual commitments in a day, and then compare it to the number of things that you actually do, particularly, and I say particularly the ones you make to yourself. I'm going to get up at this time. I'm going to finish this today. I'm going to go, whatever they are. And they're not even external commitments. They're just ones that you make to yourself. So often and so much, we are in the habit of failing to keep those commitments and not even being aware that that's how we're doing it. And the cost to that is the other thing I want to talk about. The cost is enormous. Because then I know and believe and live in the reality that I'm a person who lies all the time. And I know it's a harsh way to say it, but that's a matter of truth. And then when it becomes inconvenient, and you know, that bored, lonely, angry, stressed, and tired, when it becomes inconvenient to keep my word, then it is simply the habit that I have is not, because that's the habit I have with myself all the time. It has become inconvenient to do whatever I said I was going to do. I decide I'm sleepy. I'd rather go to a movie. I'd rather do this, that, and the other. And it has become inconvenient. So then I simply do not keep the word to myself. And then that habit moves on over into the word that I give to other people. Ephraim, how would you describe the cost of not keeping commitments?
There's a lot of the work that I do, Cowan, is I've learned a lot and been influenced a lot by Warner Earhart. And he said, there's a quote from him where he says that he says, without being a person of integrity, and we've talked about integrity, you know, and simplifying it, doing what you said you would do when you said you'd do it. He says, without being a person of integrity, you can forget about being a leader. And so for me, the real cost of going, you know, back and forth, or not really being solid in what I'm giving my word to, is there's an actual loss in workability. Like it's the foundation for performance. It's what allows for workability, for performance. And so typically we attribute our out of integrity actions to something other than, or we attribute the out of integrity results with something other than our out of integrity actions. And so the real cost of being out of integrity actually stays hidden from us, and we don't really see it.
That's true. And so let's just, I'm just going to be bold and say the cost of not keeping your word is that you don't get anything done or anywhere near as much done, and you lose your self-respect, you lose the respect of others, you lose the ability to be an effective leader, both of yourself and of others. You lose the trust and confidence of those that you could lead, and you lose the trust and confidence of yourself. So the cost of being out of integrity, attributing to something else, like this got in the way, that didn't happen, or whatever, instead of I simply did not do a certain thing when I said I would do it, we then excuse ourselves. And so we create the excuse, and another habit comes into play. We have the habit of blaming other things and the habit of creating excuses outside of ourselves. And so one of the foundational things to work on in a coaching relationship that I do, and I know Ephraim does also, is first an awareness of, and then an adherence to those things that we say we're going to do, which means changing these habits that we've just talked about. What's the first step that you would tell someone to take, Ephraim, in terms of becoming aware of the cost and aware of the frequency, perhaps, of the out of integrity action result?
In the work of, so you start to become aware of it. One of the things is that we're pretty much not aware of what we actually give our word to. And so there's the question of where is your word when it comes time to keeping your word? And then the other question, which would be, where do you keep track of your word once you've given it? And because do you ever do something where you say you're going to do something and then you forget you said you were going to do that? And
of course.
For most people, if where you're keeping track of your word is in your head, it's just not going to work. You're not going to have success in actually keeping and honoring your word. And it's not going to work if it's in your head. So there has to be somewhere that you keep your word once you've given your word.
So I just want to talk about that for a second. I know that most people simply say they're going to do something and they assume they're going to remember. And they assume that it's important enough that whatever it is they said they would remember. And the fact is we don't. We forget things all the time because we just don't have space. Too much is going on and so forth. And so the idea that Ephraim's talking about there, treat your word like it is something and you put it somewhere so that you can keep track of it. Someone gave you a wallet with $1 million in it. You would put it somewhere, and you would do it intentionally, and you might set some reminders in many places so you would remember where that was. So it wouldn't be one of those things that you put it somewhere that you'd really remember, and then you can't possibly remember where that place was that you'd really remember that you put whatever it is you put there. Keys and other kinds of things are notorious for that sort of getting lost. And I like the idea of keeping track of your word like it is something. Because incidentally, it is, and it may be the most valuable thing that you have, because at the end of the day, it really defines who you are. So anyway, go ahead with what you were doing in terms of getting someone to change that habit. I just wanted to talk about putting your word somewhere like it's a thing instead of an idea.
That really connected some things for me. So thanks for sharing that. And we think about, if someone says, you say, if someone gave you a wallet with $1 million in it, and someone might be thinking, well, my word isn't a wallet with $1 million in it. But the reality is that, and I'm certain that none of us really quite get the impact of our word and the value of it. Even though we can get, I'm sure that we're present to the value, to some of the value, but I'm not certain that we're really, if we really got the value of our word, we would never give our word to something that we didn't keep. And so to keep track of it like a wallet with $1 million in it, the reality is that it's worth a lot more than that. And it's interesting to treat it. What would it be like to treat like that? That'd be fascinating to just kind of experience. What would it be like if I treated my word like it was a bank account with $10 million in it? How would I treat my word then?
So there's a question that's come up. Ivana Taylor talks about integrity being whole and complete. A bike without brakes has no integrity. Integrity is simply being and doing that which you either say or purport to be. And I like to include both, because so much of what we do is not what we say, but how we act or the impression that we give. Being in integrity, or being integrity, means not only what you say, but the impression you intend to leave. So the way you say things and how you present is also a key piece, because you use that intentionally to create an impression of certainty or of a certain thing. The body language, the facial expressions, all of that is part of the conveyance of information. So it isn't just the words. We have millions of examples of politicians who use parsing of words to excuse certain behaviors. And the truth of it, the integrity of it is not just the word, but the entire impression that you intend to create. And living and being and doing that impression is integrity. So let's go back to this $1 trillion in a wallet. And I agree, the $1 million in a wallet is a drop in the bucket, like you said before, and million just a number. And it's not even a particularly large number these days. So in relation to money. So treating your word actually. So this is a challenge to all of you listening. I challenge you right now to just take this as an experiment. Every time you say something, either to yourself or to someone, just for a day or two, try this. Imagine that that word that you gave, intention, impression, is $1 billion or some other large number of dollars, and put it somewhere like you would something extremely valuable, intentionally, and somewhere where you know you cannot lose it or forget about it, where it's present and reminds you, and see how that impacts keeping your word. So just as I've even said that, now it connected something for me, and I'm going to try something on that too. It's just even thinking about it, describing that. I don't know what you think, Ephraim, but I'll bet it would have a huge impact on how every person listening now or later would feel about the word that they gave. You'd probably be a lot more careful with it.
Yeah, just a presence to what I'm actually giving my word to. I think that's part of we just really don't know what we give our word to. It's like, we say it, and then where does the word go once we've given the word to something? I'm married and I have kids, and I know that I know you as well, Kellen. And, I say to my wife, I say, I love you. And when I say that, I'm not describing a feeling. I'm actually making a declaration. It's a commitment to be loving. And then, times when you don't feel like being loving, and then you be loving anyway, because you made a commitment to be loving, and not based on some feeling. And so just simple things like that, that's something that, how often do we say to someone, I love you, and then we'll turn right back around and we're not loving at all. And so, there's so many things that we're giving our word to that we probably don't even notice that we're giving our word to. And I wanted to say about the comment about integrity being whole and complete. If you treat your word like yourself, and who you are is your word, then being a person of integrity, meaning doing what you said you would do when you said you would do it, leaves you as a person that's whole and complete, lacking nothing, unimpaired, lacking no component parts. Integrity. So yes, actually, that's how you experience being whole and complete, is doing what you said you do when you said you would do it. That's the beginning of it.
So let's move on to the second piece. The second piece is one of the reasons we fail, and there were 3 we're going to explore today. The second one is speaking to please others. That we talked about that a little bit in the first week, a few weeks ago, about loose lips, and that we often say things just to make somebody feel good, to end a conversation, to get stuff out of the way. We agree or disagree, whatever's appropriate, because it's convenient at that moment to do so. I want to talk about that in terms of this integrity and completeness, and being what you said you would be, and doing what you said you would do when you said you'd do it, as the beginning of experiencing and being that integrity. So if I say something to please others, and I have no intention, or there is no truth behind it, Ephraim, without any preparation, what is your reaction to what that does to me if I have a habit of doing that?
Oh, you just won't keep that word. So what you'll probably experience most likely is that your sense of yourself and who you are will just get smaller and smaller, and ultimately it'll cost you your aliveness.
I love that, and it's absolutely true. And what you do then is you know that you're a person who says stuff that isn't true and that you have no intention of keeping. And so your sense of self-worth also diminishes, because then you start to see the world the way you are, and you are a person who lies. You are a person who has no intention of keeping the word. You are a person that simply says things to control or end or manage a situation, but you have no intention of keeping it. And so then you assume that everything and everyone acts that way too, because you're seeing the world through that lens. So, we see the world the way we are, not the way it is. And when we do that, then we assume that everything around us is that way. And then we start behaving as if it's that way. It destroys our relationships, because then we assume everybody else is lying all the time too and has no intention of keeping the word. So we get defensive, we get selfish, we get hoarding, we get a whole complete activity set around us that is the antithesis of growth, abundance, and success. And so that's really, it is a self-destructive road and path. And it's also destructive to our ability to create and to do things that matter in the world. So Ephraim, if I've got a habit of doing that, saying things to please others without any intention of keeping them, what's my first step to getting rid of that habit? Because I'm sure that people struggle with that might be watching.
Yeah, it's the cost of most of the time we stay disconnected from what it costs us. And so then we don't know what it's costing us, so we just keep doing it. So getting present to what's the cost of that.
How do I do that?
Well, that's when coaching's really great. We don't see what we don't see. And so, Kellen, who I am for people is that everyone needs a coach. And it's why I have coaches. I know it's why you have coaches. And so everyone needs a coach. And, we don't see what we don't see. There's a reason that it's called a blind spot, or where the saying that you can't see the forest through the trees, where that came from. And so get a coach. That's my answer to that. Get a coach.
So I would agree. And of course, coaching is, in my mind, the fastest and easiest way to see that. And both Ephraim and I do transformational work and coaching. And my program's right there in the lower third is called Break the Cage Now. So breakthecagenow.com if you want to talk about that. But get some help. Become present to it, and not by saying, so here's not the way to do it. That's really important. I got to figure out what that's really costing me. I got to do that sometime. Taking definitive, positive, and decisive action to make it happen now and quickly and in an unbiased way is really the best way, because if you do it yourself, you'll lie. And you won't be real and true about it, even if you could see it. And if it's a blind spot, which it most likely is, you won't see it anyway. And the pieces that you can see, you'll discount and lie about. So it won't be very effective. If you really want to know what it's costing you to not live your word, to not be your word, to not be in integrity, and in terms of your creativity and your opportunity to explore and expound your gifts and talents and make a difference in the world, get some help. Get some help. That is the first step in changing that habit. I would totally agree. Any other comments before we move on to part 3, Ephraim?
Get a coach. That's my find a great coach and get a coach. I mean, really, you don't see what you don't see, and what you don't see is what runs our lives. It's the things that are hidden from our view that have our lives being the way that they are. And then we try and attribute it to something else, but it's what we're not seeing. So a really great coach is going to get you to see what you're not seeing. And so, yeah, get a coach. I'm standing by that.
I totally agree. All right. So part 3 is laziness and the easy road. So you've led right into that with a thing I want to go on with, which is you really don't see what you don't see. So I know people, when you have that conversation, they say, no, it's because I don't want to see it. But if I wanted to see it, I could. And so they sort of embark on this somewhat delusional path of thinking that you're going to find that out yourself. And I'm not pretending that self-discovery is impossible, and I'm not pretending that you can't go find out certain things by taking careful stock of that stuff. But it's the slow way, and it is truly difficult and impossible to see some things that you do not see. You don't know what they look like or what to look for. And you certainly have an incentive to stay disconnected from the cost because it's big and it might be really ugly. And so it could be scary in that way. And so you have this incentive to say, oh, get away, I don't want to know that. And so you hide. You mentally play a game of hide and seek. And if you actually have someone that's going to help you and is committed to your success, like a good coach would be, whether it's athletics, it's an easy example, or whether it's transformational or breakthrough coaching, then you have at least the tool to get connected with that. So why is lazy?
Did I lose you? Okay.
No, my mic turned off. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, you're back.
Okay, cool. Why is laziness in the easy road what we usually do?
Well, I want to say about what you were saying about coaching is that, so right now I'm on I hired a coach to, I'm putting on I'm bulking right now, putting on muscle, and I hired a coach. And I send him videos of me doing different workouts. And let's say, for example, today I'll send him a video of me doing squats because I can't see my form when I'm doing the squat, you know, and I'm the one doing the squat. I don't see what I'm doing with it. And so for someone else that can look at it and he can say, okay, this is how you're doing it. And you want to do this and you want to do that instead of doing it this way. Right. So this is what and my answer to your question is that, you know, for some people, maybe the lizard brain or the ego, whatever you call it. In my work, we call it the lizard brain or the reptile brain. It has two jobs, and those jobs are to be right and to survive. And change is like the scariest thing in the world for the lizard brain because it has this way that it sees us. And if we change from that way, then it doesn't know how to see us anymore, and it doesn't know how to survive outside of being the way that we are right now. And so it seems the easiest thing to it seems like it would be the easiest thing for us to stay the same, when in reality, that's the most difficult thing.
So that's going to be a difficult concept for some people to accept, that it's more important and more effective and better to change than to stay the same, because staying the same, it's what we know. And so we think it's safe and easy, when in fact, when you're connected, and this is something you've said several times, and I'm going to say it louder, when you become connected to the cost of what is now, then it's easy to see and understand why it is way easier, cheaper, and better to change. And the key ingredient there is to become connected to the true cost of the way the world is right now. Right?
I'm with you.
Okay, so we've talked about saying things to please people. I want to talk about that just a little bit more as the last part. Why is saying things to please people so dangerous in your mind, Ephraim?
I don't think it has anything to do with the other people. And, you know, we're making up what we think they want to hear. Most of the time, I've had the opportunity to work with a number of people, you know, and my experience has typically led me to see that it's usually, if I'm saying something to please somebody else, it's usually just my own stuff that has me doing that. You know, the stuff that I'm unwilling to confront and to deal with. So it usually has nothing to do with the other person. In fact, I'll assert that it never has anything to do with the other person. It's always my own stuff with that.
So I'm going to say that again really loud. So the idea that you're saying something to please others is nonsense, is simply not true. And you're saying stuff that has to do with you and what you will not, you know, what you describe, confront, what you're not happy with about yourself and you're not willing to confront in yourself. And it's got nothing to do with the other person. So let's go with that for a moment. And I'm going to leave that assertion on the table for people to either get comfortable with or argue with. It has nothing to do with them. It has to do with you. And the first step is to get rid of the lie that you're doing it to please them. You're doing it to not confront. Get rid of that lie. You're doing it to not confront the reality of who you are being in that relationship or with that person at that moment. So get rid of the notion that it's for them, accept and confront the notion that it's for you, and your unwillingness to confront the reality of who you're being with them, or in that relationship, or in that circumstance, and then start operating from that place and see if it changes your feeling about whether or not you want to say something, quote, because you think, or you have imagined, or you've dreamed up a world where that's something somebody wants to hear. So, Ephraim, we've come to the end of our half hour. I want to give you a chance to summarize about the whole comment, or excuse me, the title today, Habits, Oh, Those Habits. So how would you summarize language and habits in a couple sentences?
Yeah, we don't, the habits that we have, we don't see them, and we don't see that we don't see them. And so if I had a theme for, if I wanted somebody to get something from this call today, it's get a coach, because you don't see what you don't see.
Okay. I think that's perfect, a perfect summary. BreakTheCageNow.com if you want to talk to me about that, and if you want to just talk about language and its impact on you. In the chat, I would appreciate it if you would put examples of where you perhaps have become aware that your habit and use of language is not serving you. It's not serving your relationships. It's not serving your progress. And of things perhaps that you have discovered in that way, and maybe examples of where coaching has helped you to see things that you didn't see because you actually truly don't see things you don't see. Next week is our final piece on language, and we're going to talk about path to improvement, and we're going to talk about some things that we can do to change our use of language, to take control of it, and to have it be something that is creative for us, and something that is powerful, and something that is that we get to use as a tool for creation, a tool for getting the results and kind of life that we want to have. Thank you for being with us today. Ephraim, thank you for showing up again for this stimulating conversation.
Thank you.
All right. Until next week then. And if you want more conversation, www.breakthecagenow.com. Till next week.